The waters off Venezuela are heating up, literally. For the first time in years, the United States has dispatched a naval squadron of warships, submarines and marines to the Caribbean, just miles from the Venezuelan coast. Washington says it's about fighting drug cartels. Caracas insists it's a cover for something far more sinister: regime change. And at the center of this storm stand two presidents: Donald Trump, determined to project strength abroad, and Nicolas Maduro, vowing to defend Venezuela's sovereignty at any cost. So what's really going on here? Is this a legitimate anti-narcotics campaign, or the latest chapter in a long history of US interventions in Latin America? In late August 2025, news broke that the US Navy had mobilized 7 to 8 warships, among them guided missile destroyers, a cruiser, an amphibious assault ship, and even a nuclear-powered submarine. Several vessels are reportedly outfitted with Tomahawk cruise missiles, weapons designed not for chasing drug boats, but for striking land-based targets with precision. Alongside the ships, 4,000 Marines have been deployed to the region. Officially, their mission is enhanced counter-narcotics operations targeting cartels accused of smuggling cocaine and fentanyl through Venezuela. But the sheer scale of this deployment raised eyebrows immediately. After all, why would the US need a small armada, complete with Tomahawks and submarines, to stop drug traffickers in fishing boats? Washington has a simple answer: because Venezuela itself, under Nicolas Maduro, has become part of the problem. For years, US officials have accused Maduro and his top generals of running the so-called Cartel de los Soles, or Cartel of the Suns. The Justice Department has gone so far as to indict the Venezuelan president as a narco-terrorist, placing a $50 million bounty on his head. For Trump, who has long framed Maduro as an illegitimate dictator clinging to power through corruption and repression, this deployment is a message: the US is watching and willing to act. But for critics, the message looks alarmingly familiar. They see echoes of past US interventions in Latin America, where counter-narcotics or democracy promotion often paved the way for attempts at regime change. The Trump administration frames the operation in straightforward terms: a crackdown on transnational drug cartels. Officials highlight the role of Venezuela in facilitating cocaine shipments headed north, particularly through groups like the Cartel de los Soles and the violent gang Tren de Aragua, both designated as terrorist organizations. In the words of US defense officials, "We are prepared to use all our power against narco-trafficking from Venezuela." But military analysts and regional experts point to a glaring contradiction. If the target is cartel boats, why send destroyers armed with Tomahawk missiles? Why a nuclear submarine? Why thousands of Marines instead of Coast Guard cutters or intelligence surveillance planes? The scale, critics argue, suggests more than just drug interdiction. It looks like preparation, if not for a full invasion, then at least for a snatch and grab operation aimed at Maduro himself or his closest circle. The suspicion grows when considering Washington's own rhetoric. Trump himself has repeatedly called Maduro a dictator, a criminal, and a socialist threat to the hemisphere. Combined with the bounty on Maduro's head, many Venezuelans see this naval deployment as the military arm of a long-standing plan to topple the Bolivarian regime and install a government friendlier to US interests. And yet, the US maintains a paradoxical relationship with Venezuela. Even as it ramps up pressure, US companies like Chevron continue to import Venezuelan oil under special licenses. The reality is messier than the official story suggests. So the question lingers: is this about fighting drugs or about fighting Maduro? In Caracas, the response was immediate and furious. President Nicolas Maduro denounced the US naval deployment as illegal, immoral, and a direct attempt at regime change. Far from retreating under pressure, Maduro doubled down. He ordered the mobilization of up to 4.5 million civilian militia members, the so-called Bolivarian militia. Across Venezuela, enlistment centers sprang up overnight. Housewives, retirees, students, and workers queued to receive uniforms and wooden rifles for drills. The image was powerful: ordinary Venezuelans standing in line to defend the homeland against foreign invasion. For Maduro, it was both a strategic move and a propaganda tool, casting himself as the defender of Venezuelan sovereignty against US imperialism. At the same time, Maduro ordered the deployment of 15,000 regular troops to Venezuela's western border with Colombia. The border has long been a flashpoint, with smuggling routes, guerrilla groups, and narco-traffickers moving in both directions. By sending troops, Maduro signaled that he was preparing for more than just a naval standoff. He was bracing for potential ground conflict as well. To strengthen his defense at sea, Maduro deployed naval vessels and combat drones along Venezuela's coastline. The drones, some developed in partnership with Iran, were meant to deter US surveillance flights and remind Washington that Venezuela's military, though weaker, was not entirely defenseless. In fiery speeches broadcast nationwide, Maduro called on Venezuelans to resist foreign aggression. If the empire dares to set one foot on our soil, he declared, they will find a people ready to defend their independence with blood. Whether those words inspire genuine patriotism or fear-driven loyalty is up for debate. But one thing is certain. The US deployment gave Maduro a rallying cry, uniting his fractured base under the banner of nationalism. If Maduro hoped for a pause, he didn't get it. Days after the deployment, the Trump administration doubled the bounty on Maduro's head from $25 million to $50 million. For Washington, the message was blunt. Maduro is not just a political opponent, he is a wanted criminal. By elevating him to the level of international fugitives, the US blurred the line between law enforcement and military action. Alongside this, the US officially labeled Venezuela's Cartel de los Soles and Tren de Aragua gangs as terrorist organizations. The move carries enormous implications. Under US law, targeting terrorists can justify military strikes abroad. For critics, it looked like groundwork for escalation, a legal pathway to justify operations against the Venezuelan state itself. Maduro, of course, rejected these claims outright. He dismissed the charges as fabricated lies, pointing out that the US itself continues to buy Venezuelan oil. If we are narco-terrorists, he asked in one broadcast, why is Chevron still doing business here? This contradiction of pressure on one hand and business on the other underscored the complexity of US policy. It also gave Maduro ammunition to portray Washington as hypocritical, using the language of justice while pursuing the resources it craves. But beyond today's headlines lies a deeper historical resonance. For many Latin Americans, this isn't just about drugs or Maduro. It's about a long memory of US interventions, Chile in 1973, Panama in 1989, even Cuba in the 1960s. The pattern feels familiar. Vilify a leader as corrupt, mobilize military assets nearby, and prepare for regime change under the cover of moral language. This symbolism is why Maduro, despite his unpopularity at home, has managed to stir nationalist anger. He frames himself not as a dictator under siege, but as a successor to leaders like Simón Bolívar resisting imperial conquest. The naval buildup didn't just rattle Caracas. Across Latin America, governments scrambled to position themselves. In Colombia, President Gustavo Petro faced a delicate balancing act. Initially, he expressed solidarity with Venezuela against US aggression. But within days, he shifted tone, pledging cooperation on counter-narcotics operations. Colombia, long a recipient of US military aid, could not afford to alienate Washington entirely. Meanwhile, Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago openly supported the US operation. For them, the move wasn't just about drugs, it was about curbing Venezuelan influence. Guyana, in particular, has bitter territorial disputes with Caracas and welcomed any US pressure on Maduro's government. In contrast, left-leaning governments in Bolivia, Nicaragua and Cuba rallied behind Maduro, denouncing the US deployment as imperial overreach. Their support, though symbolic, reminded the world that Latin America remains divided along ideological lines. Beyond the region, international reactions were cautious. The United Nations received a formal complaint from Venezuela condemning US aggression. But in the Security Council, US allies stopped short of criticizing the deployment. Instead, they expressed concern about escalating tensions. The overall picture is clear. Washington's move has split the hemisphere. Some see it as a necessary strike against organized crime, others as a dangerous gamble that could destabilize the region.